All right, and very similar to the diagram scale that we just saw, in front of us here is actually called the centigram scale. Pretty much the same design here. We have a sort of weighing pan here for whatever you want to weigh down. We have a lever arm that topples back and forth. First thing you want to do here is you want to, again, calibrate the lever arm to the 0 mark. Again, to a very, very small extent here, you can actually twist this one here, either closer to you or away from you here, hopefully getting these lines here 0 to begin with. Then again, just for example, if I want to just weigh out a beaker here, this beaker here is a little bit bigger than the one I had before. All we're going to do is we're going to steadily use these beams here. For a centigram balance, we actually have a few more beams. We still have the 100-gram beam. We have the 10-gram beam here. We actually have a beam for the ones unit, the tenths unit, as well as the second decimal place. So in some sense here, this one might be a little bit easier to read. So again, let's try it out here. Let's start off with the heaviest one. Do I think it's 100 grams? Okay, 100 grams hasn't toppled over yet, so I know this is at least 100. Is it 200 yet? 200 here is too heavy on the right-hand side, so I know it's between 100 and 200. Again, I'm not going to just leave it in between like that. I'm going to get my increments here using the other tabs here. So I'm just going to dial this here. 40 is a little too heavy. 30 is too heavy. Right? 120 is not quite heavy enough. That's the closest one. Then for a centigram scale here, instead of dialing that wheel, we're going to actually have the ones place here. We're going to topple this back and forth. Again, it should be at one of the preset marks. It shouldn't be anywhere in between, because any of the in-betweens I need, I can just use the beam that's a little bit smaller. So 5 grams not heavy enough here. How about 6 grams? 6 grams is getting fairly close. It's a little bit on the heavy side, so let's go back to the 5 grams. And then for this one here, the first decimal place here and the second decimal place here, I'm just going to add a little bit of mass on the far side here, maybe somewhere between, okay, so still not quite heavy enough. Topple this a little bit more. Give it a second to calibrate. It's helpful if this weighing pan here isn't actually moving when you're actually doing this reading. That way it can give you a little bit more consistency. So just maybe a little bit still too light. And you can play around with this here until you get a close enough reading. So just topple that up. Remember, it was 0 to begin with. We're just going to give it a second, see if it goes back to 0. It's still slightly too light, so let's just make that heavier. When the lever arm and that 0 mark here are lined up, we know it's pretty much 0. Okay, just a little bit heavier than that. All right, so assuming that's going to equilibrate to the 0 mark, we're going to now take this reading here of the mass. So what we're going to do here, we're just going to topple it a little bit heavier. What we're going to do is we're going to start from the biggest beam. So we know that this beaker here is at least 100 grams. 100, the tens position, we can look at the second beam, so 120. We're at the 5 for the first unit, so now it's 125. To get the first decimal place here, I'm going to look at just the labeled marking, so 0.1, 0.2. I notice that this little tick here is actually between 0.8 and 0.9, so I know we're at least 0.8. To get the second decimal place, I'm going to look at the 10 spaces between 0.8 and 0.9, and that tick there looks like it's somewhere past the 5th one, not quite the 6th one here. I would go 125.85. Again, for a centigram balance, you might be able to guess even one more digit, but usually getting the second decimal place here is good enough. Let's do an error of plus or minus 0.01. Right? You can even weigh other objects here. So this one here is currently a beaker. Right? Definitely, once it's not weighed here, this is totally not calibrated. You would just slide these back to 0 to begin with. Just to show you, we can actually weigh out other objects as well. We're going to be doing a lab that we need to weigh a piece of aluminum foil. Now, aluminum foil here is it's nice and spread out like that here. It's going to be very hard to actually put on the balance here. Mass doesn't actually change when you actually fold this aluminum foil, so it's actually okay for you to just fold it. Just make sure here it's sort of free hanging here. I'm at 0. It was calibrated to begin with. Aluminum foil, although fairly light here, it is weighing down this side here. Now I know it's not going to be 100 or either 10 grams, so let's try maybe the 1 gram first. Is it 1 gram? Dial it this way. So probably somewhere between 1 and 5 grams. 2 is a little bit too light. And again, it's just a little bit of trial and error going back and forth here. So between 3 and 4, so I'm going to go 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock this one here until, just like we saw with the beaker here, until these ones here are lined up again. So I'll give it a second for that to see if it calibrate. I'm a little bit too heavy, so that's my counterbalance. Just let this rock back and forth. So still a little bit too heavy here. So getting a little closer, still a little bit too heavy. But once it is aligned with that 0 mark here, we can take a reading. So something like that. So we know it's not in the hundreds, we know it's not in the tens here. It's going to be 3 point. First decimal place here is 0.4, 0.5, so it's going to be 0.4, 3.4. And the second decimal place is how many tick marks are we're over. It's probably going to be 0.42 for the mass there. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks, guys.